Hello, I'm Rudy Mitchell. I'm the Associate Director for Evaluation and Research in the Teaching and Learning Lab. Thank you for joining our virtual March talk, which is part of the Teaching and Learning Lab Speaker Series. Today we have two guests, Dr. Kyle Keane and Anna Musser, and their topic is co-designing, I should know this by now. Co-designing assistive technology across the globe. Dr. Kyle Keane, he's been a lecturer and a research scientist in the material science and engineering department. There he teaches material science, human-centered design, and engineering technology that helps people with disabilities. Kyle is a lecturer and also a research scientist in the department. For looking at Kyle's background, it's incredible just at MIT, the number of courses he's taught. It's an incredible variety. For example, it includes, he's been the lead lecturer in principles and practices of assistive technology, computational methods for material science and engineering, electronic, optical, and magnetic properties of materials, and then most recently his 3008 subject. And during his, looking at his website, it's incredible the number of different positions he's held. He begins with being a theoretical physicist, and then moves on to a computational material scientist. He's been a software developer, an educational evangelist, which is certainly the case, and also a research director. And I found it interesting on his website that he wrote, quote, "My passions lie at the intersection of computational science, education, and assistive technology and advocacy." And I think that sort of sums up Kyle a lot. He's done a lot of things, but he's truly passionate, and especially about working with people with disabilities. And Anna is a research specialist, and she designs and evaluates experiments that test the effectiveness and of educational technologies and interventions at MIT. She also taught the 3008 course, and she's now working with Professor Pawan Sinhan to develop an MIT module about co-designing with people who have physical disabilities. Anna also works up the street. She's involved with Harvard, and there she's conducting psychological research in the Langer Mindfulness Lab. So at this point, I'm going to transfer it to Kyle.
Thank you all. This was originally planned to be in person, and due to the current circumstances, we scrambled at the last moment to try to make this into a virtual presentation, which has been an exciting endeavor. I appreciate those of you who are online, and it allows you to take naps in between when I get boring, so that's a good thing. But please wake up when we transition to my colleagues, because they are often far more exciting than I. So thank you for being here. As you have questions throughout, please type them into the chat window. So this Zoom interface has a chat, and we have somebody who is monitoring the chat, and they will get my attention at the very end in order to ask me questions out loud so that everyone can hear my responses. So feel free throughout just to type your questions into the chat. Yeah, so I'm super grateful to be here. That is an overwhelming biography that I haven't heard in a while. But yeah, thank you, Rudy, for the nice, kind introduction. So before I begin, everything that I do is in the legacy of Professor Seth Teller, who started the Principles and Practices of Assistive Technology class and tragically passed away a few years after starting it. I feel great gratitude to be able to continue that class and try to bring that model externally to other people outside of MIT and to spread it around MIT as well. So there is a memorial fund, and if you're interested in knowing more about his life or legacy, feel free to get in contact. So what's the big idea here is always a good question to start with, and it's not that big of an idea. It is simply to teach engineers, designers, innovators, inventors, makers, to involve people who have disabilities in every stage of the innovation ecosystem, especially when it comes to building out assistive technologies, which are technologies to help people with disabilities. So this is, might not be groundbreaking, but it is something that needs to be repeated so that we continue to do it and that we learn to do it more and more respectfully and more in line with the outcomes that we're hoping to provide. And so at MIT and beyond, we've been running a few experiments, educational experiments, to understand in which context we can engage engineers and students with people who have disabilities to see what types of innovations can come out. On campus, we have our semester-long class. There's also a month-long ATHack, which is something like a hackathon, and I'll explain more about that later. We've been taking MIT students abroad with Anna's help. So this was first named 3008 when I was in material science, and now is a special subject in course 6. And we'll find out where it ends up living in the future. We also have been working with Beaver Works Summer Institute to provide this type of engagement for high schoolers and middle schoolers. And we have some online resources and international communities we're trying to develop. So the big idea is actually fairly simple. Let's just get people who have disabilities involved at every stage. The actual nitty-gritty details about how to do that are quite complex, and we'll hopefully share some of those today. The reason that I engage is threefold at least. One is to spread some level of awareness. I myself have a visual impairment. I'm legally blind, and I have found that awareness is one of the most important things that can help me in this world, because when people realize that I use a white cane because I'm visually impaired, I sometimes get friendly people who offer to help. And when people realize that it's not an insult if I don't want their help, then I get to move on with my day without having any struggle. So basic awareness about how to engage if you happen to know somebody or notice somebody with a disability. Some of the definitions of accessibility and assistive technology I like to share. And then to empower students as well as people who have disabilities to apply engineering skills in real world settings, and to find value in the lived experience of other individuals and how to use that value in order to inform better product design and innovation. And finally, to find sustainable ways to engage entire communities in a proactive self-improvement process. So how do we get stakeholders who are living in different contexts to become active agents of change? So in that same vein, I'm going to start with awareness and start to offer some shared vocabulary. So the World Health Organization defines disability with 3 dimensions. There's an impairment, an activity limitation, and a participation restriction. So an example of an impairment is just something that is not typical about a body's structure or function or mental abilities that have some type of an impairment. So a really easy to understand one is a broken foot. A broken foot has an impairment of the function and structure of a foot. Then there has to be some type of activity limitation. So a broken foot is just a broken foot. And then when you go try to walk on a broken foot, you realize that walking is quite difficult on a broken foot, and walking long distances is even more difficult. And so there's an impairment, which is a structural thing, and activity limitation, which is some way that that impairment manifests as the individual tries to move through the world. And then there's a participation restriction. So if somebody who has a broken foot is trying to walk, and maybe they have access to some crutches, but then they are invited to go on a hike up this wooden staircase that we are showing on the slide, which is very, as we call, janky, which is means just very, very unsafe and sort of nailed together with abandon for safety. Then you have some type of a participation restriction where if this was the road that you had to travel to get to work, you now have a participation restriction on work because you can't walk up those stairs with a broken foot, even likely with crutches, without great effort. Yeah, so disability, 3 dimensions. And it's important to also broaden that even further. So disability, when you think of impairments or limitations, you can start to think of the different variations of the human experience. So if I say, like, I personally have a vision impairment, but a vision impairment can mean many different things. It can manifest itself in many functional impairments, such as blurry vision. So if you're wearing glasses and you take your glasses off, then your vision is likely to become blurrier. Or blurry vision can happen if the lens of the eye, like a cataract, has formed on the lens of the eye, and that stops light from getting into the retina in a clear focal path. Or you can have a restricted visual field. So in my case, the outer parts of my retina have insufficient circulation, and so the cells are dying off slowly, and those cells, when they die off, stop allowing me to see peripherally. So I can't see anything around me to the sides unless I turn my head and look directly with the center of my pupil. Other common ones are color impairment. So somebody who's colorblind has a visual impairment, but it's a very subtle and nuanced thing about color, not just blind versus not blind. So one of our important messages is that disability is not a binary thing where somebody either has, blindness or not blindness. There's these really, complex and subtle and nuanced experiences that you need to talk to an individual in order to be able to understand. We don't expect students to learn all of these subtle nuances. We want them to respect that they exist so that they engage with the individual to learn those things that come from the lived experience of the individual. A common question, which I find to be a bit of a tricky one, but I know that a lot of people want to know, do we have some estimate of the number of people who have disabilities in the world? And the World Health Organization estimates it to be about 15% of the world's population has some form of disability. So that's 1 billion people approximately. And they estimate that 2 to 4% of the world's population experiences significant difficulties in functioning. So as I said, disability can exist on a spectrum. And so some disabilities have, fairly adaptable situations where one can adapt to living with that disability, and some have very significant difficulties due to inaccessible resources, infrastructure, or just the extreme nature of a particular impairment or disability. So outside of the technical definition of disability as a thing that the World Health Organization studies, disability can also exist in a few different ways that can become a bit more personal if you spend time to think about it. So what we've been talking about a lot are permanent disabilities. So a condition that has no prognosis for being made better through medical or technical intervention. So an example is, I have a disease that up until recently was believed to be incurable. There's some clinical trials on the horizons that might help, but it was believed that my retinal degeneration was going to progress and stay permanently gone. So that's an example of a permanent progressive disability. Outside of the context of those more permanent disabilities, you can start to think about temporary disabilities, such as breaking an arm and needing to carry something. So in the moment when your arm has to be in the sling and you're not supposed to use it, that arm is not accessible to you to use. And so you're temporarily disabled because you have a temporary impairment, which will resolve itself through medical or technological intervention. And then even more broadly, one can think about situational disabilities. And this becomes much more relevant when you're designing products out in the world. So an example of a situational disability is if you are holding a baby in one arm and trying to carry groceries and trying to get into your house. At that moment, you have a bag of groceries that's very heavy, you have a baby in one arm, which is very delicate. And then you need to get through a door. And in that moment, you have some impaired mobility in your arms and the ability to open that door. And so everyone experiences throughout the day situational disabilities. Other examples are texting while driving is an impaired version of driving, or being in a very loud environment is an impaired version of being able to communicate. So if you're at the bar or a nightclub and there's very loud music and you want to communicate with your friends, you will have difficulty hearing them unless they yell very loudly, and that's because you're situationally impaired in that bar or nightclub. So in this context, we can think about who are the players and what roles and responsibilities can we each hold in order to empower people with disabilities to engage fully. And there's the historical model has been the medical model of disability, which treats disability just as an impairment and believes it's something to be treated with medical intervention or technology. And sometimes a medical intervention or technological intervention can remove the impairment, which removes the activity limitation, which removes the participation restriction. But sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes the person needs to get even better with the technology than, you know, a very self-driven technology. So that then starts to fall on the individual. And the individual is asked to find training and adapt to their situation. So the individual now has some responsibility to go out and find people who know how to navigate with a white cane, for instance, if they're visually impaired, and they need to adapt to their environment by either using something to control the situational sound or take paths that are more navigable by sound. And then on top of that, the society, no matter how much a piece of technology could possibly help and an individual could learn how to use that piece of technology, there's some societal responsibility to provide an infrastructure that's compatible with the current person's skills and the capabilities of their assistive technology. So a common example of this is screen readers for the blind. So when a blind person uses a computer, they can use a screen reader which has access to the text on the screen and reads it out loud to them. And if you get to a website that hasn't been made accessible, the screen reader has a much harder time giving context to the person who's trying to navigate it with the screen reader. And so a societal obligation is to make the website accessible such that the screen reader can go and semantically understand the headings on the page, the text on the page. If there's images, is there alt text for those images, and information that can be communicated in text to help a blind person navigate this page, which is usually designed around visual appeal. And so I've talked implicitly about assistive technology, and just to be a bit more explicit, assistive technology is any piece of technology, including software or physical products, that can help increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a person with a disability. Common examples are hearing aids that can help some types of hearing impairments, wheelchairs that can help people engage in new types of sports, and white canes that can help visually impaired people navigate the world around them, and prosthetic limbs that can empower somebody who's missing a limb in order to be kind of mobile again in the same way, or to use the arms if the arms are the ones that have been lost. So the last bit of, or the second to last bit of maybe common sense information, but I really want to make sure that we have this shared vocabulary, is co-design. And co-design is my favorite term for this idea that exists in a lot of different ways, which is just to design jointly with stakeholders, where stakeholders are people who have some type of investment in a product doing a particular thing. And so this is also known as participatory design, where people who are going to use a thing participate in designing it. Collaborative design, cooperative design, co-creation, co-production. The philosophy of design thinking often envelops this as part of the design process. And so we are very strong advocates of this co-design process. That's just our favorite name for it, but there's many names for the same idea. And our very last thing is the humanistic co-design of assistive technology. Now that phrase can be broken apart, where co-design means to involve people who have disabilities. Assistive technology is technology to help those people with disabilities. And I like to throw humanistic in the front because we need to stop and listen before we start designing with and for people. So, you know, you can take what you want from the fun visuals. We have some monkeys that are doing the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, which is the thing that we shouldn't do. So we should uncover our eyes, uncover our ears, and start to speak to each other in order to gain that lived experience and to take your technical skills and combine it with the lived experience of people who have disabilities. Okay, so now we talk about some of the nitty-gritty detail about how to accomplish that. So we're trying to empower our students in order to engage in this respectfully. So I'm going to start on campus because that is my wheelhouse. The first thing is this class that I've already mentioned, Principles and Practices of Assistive Technology. It's a 12-unit semester-long residential class at MIT. It's a project-based class where teams of students pair with somebody in the community who has a disability in order to work together to define and deliver some piece of technology that attempts to help that person do some activity that they would like to do that they've been encumbered to do so far. This is cross-listed in Course 6, Course 2, and Health Science Technology. And it's usually about 30 to 40 students, 12 units, and any more information you want on that, you can grab from ppat.mit.edu, ppat.mit.edu. And there's lots of past projects documented and information about the class. Here we're going to show you one particular video from that class that we really liked, and we hope that you will like as well. So hopefully the audio goes okay. If it doesn't, we may need to pause it and come back. It's also captioned.
I'm Julie Honke, and I'm a bagpiper. I'm 58, and I live in Marble.
All right, okay. My audio. Oh, the HDMI has it. I'm sorry, you can still share it, but we can keep it.
Forgive us, we're having technical difficulties as we're trying to figure out how to share the audio for the video.
It should be working, but it's going through the HDMI. Can you try playing again?
My playing has offered sustenance and meaning to people throughout the area for 15 years. And now I'm going to share a story with you that explains what brings me here today. I suffered a devastating stroke in February 2017. After 2.5 months of hospitalization, I finally went home. The right side of my body was useless, there was no brain to talk to it, and I began the long struggle back. I'm going to skip ahead 2 3/4 years to what I want today. I want to play the pipes again. But that's a pipe dream, pun intended. If I can play the practice chanter, I can probably play the bagpipes, because my left arm handles the pressure flow within the full set of pipes. I need my right hand to play the lower notes, and they've got a sound in order to hear anything. And I don't even have independent finger control. I gave the PPAT kids a tall order, but just get me started.
And we did just that. One prototype was simple. It covered 3 holes and allowed Julie to play 5 out of the 9 possible notes. The complex prototype resembles the keys on a clarinet and would allow Julie to play all 9 notes. However, this prototype is far from perfect and needs more work to play reliably.
The first step in coming up with a prototype was to see whether our ideas for how the mechanism would move made sense and worked in practice. To do this proof of concept testing, we made a quick prototype out of wooden dowels, popsicle sticks, and duct tape. Due to the organic geometry of the practice chanter, 3D printing was the most logical method of manufacturing for us.
To create an airtight seal, we created silicone pads ourselves by pouring food-safe silicone into the baking pans. For the more complex prototype, we incorporated additional elements like springs, metal rods, and bearings into our design. This more complicated assembly required us to ream, drill, and spend extra time in the machine shops to retrofit our 3D printed parts.
We learned so much about designing and manufacturing that by the end of the semester, we were able to streamline our design and assembly processes. All that was left was to show our work to Julie.
All right, so in addition to the PPAT semester-long program that we have for the MIT students, last summer we piloted with Beaver Work Summer Institute, a high school version. And so this was 4 weeks, 9 to 5 every Monday to Friday. And we had the students engage in a very similar process. I thought it was quite successful. The students enjoyed it. And we will be doing it again this summer if everything works out, hopefully. So one of the teams produced the oven mitigator, which I thought was a very clever name that hopefully you'll appreciate by the end. So their co-designer, Nico, has dwarfism. And so she has short arms, but she loves to make big cookie trays worth of food for people that she loves. And when she goes into the oven to pull out these big cookie trays worth of food, unfortunately, the current oven mitts don't cover all the way up her arms. And she uses her body to sometimes stabilize the tray, which ends up burning her. And so the team worked with her to design a oven mitt that would cover the parts of her body that get burnt when she's taking out these large trays. And so you can see some hand-drawn sketches of the different types of design ideas. One is connected from the hand across the front of the chest all the way to the other hand. And the other is just a kind of protection thing that runs along the chest in conjunction with 2 oven mitts that would be custom made to her hand size. And then they made very low fidelity prototypes by just cutting these out of fabric. And there's some silly gifs, if you're able to see those, of one of the students putting on a little fashion show. And then they worked with Nico to understand the proper size. They went out and bought the proper insulating material and did end up stitching together a complete end product, which they did a great job of documenting on Instructables. And so there is a QR code down there, and there's a little Instructables out there now for the oven mitigator. And the students were thrilled because 20 minutes after they posted this Instructable, a few people found it and sent them notes on Instructables saying, "This is amazing, I'm gonna make one for myself." And these were people not with dwarfism, they were just people who were excited not to burn themselves. So it was a perfect example of sometimes how innovation on a very small scale for an individual can end up becoming something that has a really large impact for a lot of people. So around MIT, now that I've been out here advocating for this humanistic co-design process, there's been a lot of students who in other project-based classes are taking projects on that involve people with disabilities. And one of the gaps that I saw was that these students didn't have sufficient training in the basics of disabilities, common impairment types. Very importantly, they didn't know about current assistive technologies, so a lot of them kept trying to reinvent the wheel. And they weren't clear on the role of society, accessibility, and infrastructure. And so we're putting together with support that we're very grateful for from MITx, a short online module that will help prime people for engaging in co-design of assistive technology with people who have disabilities. Hopefully that'll come out in the next few months. If you have interest, please email me and I'll put you on the announcement list. One more, and the last kind of core campus activity that we have going on is a student-run initiative called ATHack that was started by some students who took PPAT when Seth was teaching it. And after the class, they were so driven that they wanted to continue this process that they started an event that started as a hackathon and then became a month-long process. So the month-long process is to introduce students to their co-designer and to have them spend a month iterating on a design, and then to have a build day where they all come in and build the equipment and test it together. And so it's sort of an adaptation of a hackathon in order to support the longer term engagement that is required to understand the subtle nuances of assistive technology. So I'm gonna let their video talk for them.
It's our job as parents. You're giving your heart, yourself, your everything to have them meet their potential, be the best little person they can be.
And then one of the challenges we see, well, there's a few things about this one.
Coming to MIT, coming to things like ATHack and seeking out new assistive technologies, it's part of that picture. It's part of moving them forward. It's exciting.
Yeah, okay, good luck with everything.
ATHack is a hackathon where students have the chance to work on a prototype of a technology with a person in the community who needs that technology. So I'm really passionate about technology as an engineer, also passionate about public service, and I wanted there to be a way to bridge the gap between those two things at MIT.
That would make the most difference daily in my life.
We had to pick one thing that we asked ATHack to solve. What would be that one thing that would bubble to the top? Just to know how much flexibility we'd have. And let me get back to you.
As a designer, we try to get into the mind of the person who's using our product. Throughout the whole event and even like the weeks leading up to it, me and my team kept thinking, you know, if I was Lily, how would I use this? If I was Lily, where would I put my hand? Where would I put my weight? You know, how would I walk? How would I move?
There's 2 walkers right now.
Our team was trying to build a modified walker for Lily that will allow her greater maneuverability so that she can really be a kid. Walk along the grass, be on the beach with her family. Apparently, Lily has fallen a number of times just walking on the sidewalk because it wasn't smooth enough.
Diameter here and a cylinder here.
This issue is already taken care of in the design.
She wasn't as shy as I expected. She was fearless.
Is this your first hackathon?
You can use those ones.
Yeah, that'd be totally great.
Which ones, depending on like where you're going.
Exactly.
Yeah, like almost makes you like want to tear up when you saw Lily with her new walker and the wheels. Like, she was so excited she can move around.
Hi, thanks for your help, Lily. One thing I think about when we decided to do this, I do strongly believe in awareness. Disability didn't touch my world before I had my kids. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Just opened my eyes a little bit to the way we design things and make things, and don't always consider someone who might have more difficulty performing a certain task. I think I have a greater awareness now.
No matter what career path you choose, disability is going to touch that, and having that individual be aware of that, I obviously see the importance.
So I wanted to point out that both of those videos were captioned by the students themselves, which is something that we endeavor to have our students learn how to do, because it is a very interesting technological process in order to give people who are deaf and can't hear the ability to read what's being spoken inside a video. And we also are very happy that during this webinar, we have somebody doing live CART services, C-A-R-T, which is real-time captions that can be done over the internet. So somebody's listening in and typing in real time in order to give us access to text on the screen for people who wish to read what's happening rather than listen to it. So now I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague and partner, Anna Musser, who's going to talk about the way that we've been taking students abroad in order to engage with this model in different contexts.
Next slide.
Okay. Oh, yeah, let me say, so one of our things is, as we started to engage internationally, we realized that within a weekend, which is a traditional hackathon, you can get to know a person a little bit and you can get to know some of their stories, but there's no way that you can understand all of the subtle nuance of living with a disability in a different context and have time to design and build something. And so we needed to transform this from a hackathon where we go to a city in a new country and spend a weekend getting people excited about projects and having them pitch at the very end, to a program where we show up, we have a weekend where people get to get connected with locals who have disabilities, and then they come up with an initial idea that they pitch that will become part of a year-long mentorship process. And so during the weekends, we spend our time mentoring students from these various countries who are working on projects to help locals with disabilities.
Hi, my name is Anna Musser. This past January, I had the pleasure of co-teaching humanistic co-design of assistive technology in around the world. We did this through course 6, and we brought 5 intrepid MIT students to India. While we were there, we taught principles and practices of assistive technology, basics around disabilities, and we also allowed our students to interact with some fantastic nonprofit organizations that work within the field of assistive technology. While we were in India, we ran a 3-day workshop, which was the beginning of a year-long process of creating low-fidelity prototypes of assistive technology. We did this workshop in Chennai, India, and there we brought together both our MIT students, local Indian university students, local professionals from the Chennai area, and local individuals with disabilities. And the purpose of this workshop was to collaboratively create low-fidelity prototypes and specified plans of assistive technology. So one of the things that we do whenever we run one of these workshops is we hold something called an Exploratorium. What an Exploratorium does is that it allows people without disabilities to explore assistive technologies and simulate various limitations or impairments. So if you look at the picture, the top picture, you can see a number of individuals using canes. What you can't perhaps see is that all of them have their eyes closed. Down in the lower left corner, there are individuals or participants in wheelchairs trying to figure out how to navigate getting in and out of doorways. In the middle bottom photo, you'll see a young woman trying to put glasses on another young woman with mittens on. The reason that she has mittens on is that she is simulating dexterity impairment. And then our last picture on the lower right-hand side is a scene very common that you see around campus. It's a circle of students all on their phones. What you can't see is that they're all trying to navigate a screen reader with their eyes closed. So to get a sense of what it's like to navigate their phones without having any visual input. So there are certain things that our exploratoriums or these simulations can do, and there are certain things that these exploratoriums cannot do. What these exploratoriums can do is they can expose people to assistive technology. Many of our participants had never used a cane, never been in a wheelchair, had never used a screen reader. Something else they can do is they can simulate various impairments. So what is it like when your hearing is muffled? What is it like when you don't have visual input and you are attempting to get from point A to point B? The last thing that they can do is they can build empathy. What might it feel like to want to go somewhere in a wheelchair and find that the only way to get there is through stairs? How does that emotionally impact your day. There are certain things that our simulations absolutely cannot do. They cannot demonstrate adaptation. The way an individual uses a cane the first day they are handed it is entirely different than the way that somebody can artfully navigate with a cane after 3 years of daily use. Our simulations also cannot convey the emotional journey that is involved with discovering a piece of assistive technology, becoming comfortable with that piece of technology, using it in an environment, seeing where it can be helpful and where its limitations are. And our simulations absolutely cannot replace the need for our human experts. So just because I am wearing a blindfold for a couple of hours and I try to navigate with a cane for like a day or two does not mean I now have all of the expertise needed in order to design for somebody who uses a cane. That expertise is something that is gained through daily lived experience, which is why it is so absolutely essential to involve individuals with disabilities and impairments within the design process, because they have such a wealth of information that we ourselves, if you are not using a piece of assistive technology on a daily basis, cannot imagine. It is something that you need to connect and talk about. Which is why we bring in co-designers. Co-designers is our term for individuals with disabilities who come in and share their lived experience with us so that we can create pieces of assistive technology collaboratively. We were so lucky. We had such a wonderful group of co-designers. Some of them had visual impairments, some of them had hearing impairments, some of them had mobility impairments, but all of them brought their lived experience and shared that with us. One of the things that we try to do in each of our workshops is we attempt to build a sense of community. So we don't just want to learn about the co-designers, we want to create a connection. So we make sure that as we ask the co-designers to share some of their life with us, that we make sure that we share some of our life with them. They talk about what their interests are, what they enjoy doing in their life, what their families are like. We talk about what we enjoy. Funny stories about our families, what we're studying, what they're studying. This is essential for building a sense of community. In order to facilitate the design process, one of the things that we do with our co-designers also is we have them go through what is called a journey map. A journey map basically is when an individual walks you through a typical day in their life. And they say in that typical day what they enjoy, what they're looking forward to. It indicates where their strengths are, how they use their strengths, as well as in parts in their day where they find a challenge. And through this process, with our co-designers, we were able to identify a point or an activity in their life that was challenging to them that they think could be made better by the introduction and of a piece of assistive technology. So once we're able to, I need to move to the other slide deck. Sorry, technical difficulties. So once we were able to identify with co-designers a piece of assistive technology that they think would be helpful for them, then teams would start to ideate what ideas they thought might work for the co-designers, and the co-designers would tell them whether they believed it would be helpful or not. So to give you a sense of what our teams did, I'm just going to walk you very briefly through one of our team's final presentations. So the teams come up and they introduce their co-designer. In this case, it was Arun Kumar. They tell us a little bit about the co-designer. He is a quality analyst. He is very comfortable using technology, so we highlight a strength. He lost his vision 3 years ago. And what assistive technologies he currently uses, one of the primary ones being screen readers. Then we identify the problem statement. So this might be something that's a little familiar to anybody who happens to have a sibling. So Arun Kumar shares a room with his brother, and they share a closet and they share a dresser, and their clothes get mixed up, and it causes him great frustration as well as time loss. So his current solution is to organize his clothes and his brother's clothes in a particular way. The problem with that solution is that his brother is messy. So something that we ask all of our teams to do, it's so essential, is to make sure they research what assistive technology may already exist in order to solve this particular problem. So some of the assistive technologies they researched were things like Braille tags, but when they talked to Arun Kumar about that, he thought that they would be too heavy. He didn't like the feel of them, so they decided to ideate a different solution, and they came up with QR codes. The reason Arun Kumar wanted to use QR codes is, one, he's very comfortable with technology, and two, he loves the idea of being able to personalize the labels so that he could give whatever information he wanted to each piece of clothing. Something that we asked our students to do in addition to the co-design process is to identify something we call primary gains and secondary losses. Often with assistive technology, when you create a piece of assistive technology, there's always a primary gain. There is a thing that assistive technology is supposed to do in order to make that person's life easier or to allow them a greater sense of independence. However, with many pieces of assistive technology, there is something called a secondary loss. A secondary loss is an unintended downside of a piece of assistive technology. An example of that would be if I am a visually impaired person using a cane, my primary gain is the fact that I am able to navigate more effectively. My secondary loss would be that I am putting undue stress on my shoulder and joints. So in this particular project, students were able to identify the primary gain, which would be Arun Kumar would be able to identify his clothes with ease. The secondary loss would be this would leave one of his hands totally occupied with the phone. And they spoke to him about it, and because he is comfortable with his phone and he enjoys using it, he felt that the secondary loss was small enough that he wanted to move forward with the project. And so our team is continuing to work on this project, and here is a lovely photo of them. All right. How are we doing on time?
We are very short on time. You guys?
Oh, I can just speak very briefly that one of the benefits that we've had is the workshop we've ran in Chennai. We've been able to do it 3 times over the last 18 months. And as the result of that, we've been able to have people who come back. So co-designers who've liked the workshops enough that they've come back and they've brought their friends, participants who've liked the workshop enough that they've come back and they've brought their friends, as well as we've had a few teams who've been able to work on their projects over the course of a year in order to move them forward. So what you're seeing right now is pictures of one team that did just that. They wanted to make geometry and shapes more accessible to children with visual impairments. So they created puzzle sets that were tactile in nature that could teach children about different concepts in geometry and architecture. So for instance, one puzzle, they have multiple triangles that can fit into a perfectly designed shallow hole that is the shape of a square, to show that triangles can be placed together in order to make a square. And they are currently now working with a school for the blind in order to move that project forward, because it is crucial in all steps to keep co-designers involved as you continue to iterate and refine your pieces of assistive technology.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to run a little experiment, which is to have our colleague who put together all of Saudi Arabia stuff present via a recording through a webinar. So please forgive us if this doesn't work.
Thank you so much, Anna, for giving me this opportunity to talk about co-designing assistive technologies, particularly in our experience in Saudi Arabia. Just a bit about myself to start. My name is Shuriken Megden. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in the Mechanical Engineering Department, specifically the Ideation Lab, which is led by Professor Maria Yang. I came to the lab for the purpose of conducting research in the area of human-computer interaction, focusing primarily on user-centered design. My research was concerned with identifying pain points of family caregiving for potential technological solutions. Of course, if you're in MIT and if you have any interest in accessibility, then you'll likely have heard of PPAT. And that's how I got to know about Kyle and about his initiative as well. And of course, I was only looking to be a mentor on PPAT. I thought I was privileged enough, but we got quite excited about the idea of bringing the initiative to Saudi Arabia as well. And that's where I came in. I helped find partners in Riyadh to carry out the workshop in January of this year. I was also part of the team that came into Chennai in January as well. I'm currently managing several projects that came out of the Riyadh cohort, and I'll hopefully be the future instructor for Beaver Works middle school program. So persons with disabilities in the Middle East in general and Saudi Arabia specifically face a number of barriers in regards of self-expression, creativity, and having personal agency over their lives, essentially. And these barriers are partly due to inflexible institutional infrastructures, but also to the widespread social attitudes that stereotype and marginalize those that are physically or mentally different from the typical majority. And of course, it's not just a matter of the disabled or often invisible, but they're also conceived only in terms of the disability. And what I've noticed in being in Saudi Arabia is that is the fact that one's disability is often shrouded with secrecy, and it is oftentimes so well guarded that you wouldn't even realize someone has a disability or even come in contact with the person with a disability because they are so well hidden. While Saudi Arabia has undertaken various measures to promote rights of persons with disabilities as part of its larger Vision 2030, from the establishment of welfare authorities to the promotion of persons within the community, however, cultural and social attitude remain languid. So bringing the workshop in January was quite opportune. We had a brilliant mix of people joining the workshop, many of them were disabled and willingly there to talk about their experience. We had a little over 40 people participating with 10 co-designers. And interestingly, directly related to what I've been doing with Maria, which is focusing on caregivers, a lot of caregivers wanted to be a part of this community and share their own experiences and people that they're taking care of.
Okay, for the sake of time, I'm gonna cut it off there, and I accidentally showed that Shurok's brother was actually one of the co-designers, which was a lovely family connection. So we had the whole Al Megrin tribe was present at the event, and I asked Shurok to put together that statement about the cultural context, but we should also have a disclaimer, which is that any society is very large and highly diverse, and within any given culture, there's going to be a lot of different views and perspectives on disability, but we have to try our best to bring up some of the issues that we face, such as large institutional barriers. And I will also say that while we were there in Saudi Arabia, I was brought to tears by the openness of the participants and the extreme excitement of the student engineers to engage in this type of work. So it's a place that for me is very full of hope and optimism about innovation that will come. Yes, and we want to thank our partners from all of that endeavor, which HCI Lab and the Saudi Authority for Intellectual Property and Maria Yang and the Ideation Lab. And so with that, as if it was planned, we are right on time for ending, and I just happen to have talked so long that questions might have to run after for those of you who are willing to stay. But we'll see what goes now. Thanks.
So I would like to, no feedback. I would like to open us up now to questions if you'd like to enter them via the chat. I have none so far.
That works as well.
That might work. That will definitely get us to be finished on time. But I will just hold in case anyone has a second to think and would like to enter it via the chat.
So does that mean I can ask a question?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
as long
Let's.
as you ask it into a
Okay.
microphone.
So we have one non-chat question.
So the question is, it goes back to having students work with the co-designers and having the students probe what a day, what a day would be like for them. And when I saw the teams, they looked fairly large, 6 to 8 people. Do you give the teams training on how to walk through a person with disabilities beforehand?
Yeah. So let me. Am I unmuted? All right. So, so the question, just in case it didn't go through, is what type of training is happening in these workshops? We're not just throwing people into a room, right? And the answer is no, we're not throwing them into a room, although it sometimes looks that chaotic. One of the things that I'm really proud about, so what we used to do was we would give the students design lectures and talk about the design process, and then give the co-designers, the participants with disabilities, a different lecture. And what we realized is that there was a weird mismatch of information that we had been giving by following this traditional format of training these two parties separately. And so now we bring everyone into one big room and we talk through the design process as a giant unit. So the people with disabilities are sitting in the room, the student engineers are sitting in the room, and we're telling everyone, hey, this is what it's like to ask somebody to tell you about their day and to disclose some of your information. So Anna and I actually hop up on the stage and model it in front of everyone, because it's a bit abstract to say, ask the person about their day. And then you're gonna go, hey, how was your day? It was okay. So we have to model how to dig a little bit deeper and like, okay, what did you do? What did you have for breakfast? Like ask some benign but probing questions in order to establish some type of rapport. So that's another big component of the humanistic part, is we show them in traditional design schemes, the designer is this person who works with a client, and they're almost like an objective observer. And in the way that we're engaging people, we want them to just be peers. So if you ask somebody what they had for breakfast, you should tell them what you had for breakfast. like establish a relationship as humans, not as a designer and a client. And so we really try to bridge that and be really explicit about setting that as an example.
Something's going on between the students and the co-designers, that there's a project they're working on, a specific goal, but what you just described means there's all sorts of other dimensions. Not only empathy that you mentioned earlier, but this degree of honesty when they exchange who they are, what they go through, what their day is like. But can you just speak a little about the impact? Because it seems to me people who go through your experience are changed, but in what ways?
Question that I don't know that I have an answer to yet, unfortunately.
I mean, I think we can talk a little bit to some of the experiences that participants, both co-designers and designers, have shared with us. One of the sweetest things that I think happened during our Chennai workshop is we had a young man who was working with a woman with a visual impairment. She was a very talented writer. She had these books and books of poetry in Braille, and she would read them out to the group. And he was also interested in writing, and he decided that he wanted to help create a navigation app for her. And one of the things that he said during his presentation is that he wanted to make transportation easier for her so she could write one more poem, because the world deserved that poem. And I feel like that is some of the level of connection that ends up being shared as the result of it. We've had participants, co-designers, come up to us and to other participants saying that this was the first time they felt genuinely included within a design process. and that it felt very empowering, and started giving them ideas for like perhaps wanting to create their own pieces of assistive technology. One of our participants, our co-designers, who has gone to 2 of our Chennai workshops, actually wants to set up his own co-create workshop in Delhi now, since he's moving there, to connect people in that community and to start something similar there. And I think another story that just leaps to my mind is I remember last year we had a participant run up to us just really excited because he happened to be on a train and there was a man in a wheelchair, and he was just so excited that he was able to like strike up a conversation with him. That was something that he would not have done before, because he no longer felt awkward. He no longer felt like there was some type of barrier between him personally interacting with this individual, and they shared a nice train ride and they exchanged information. And you know, I think those are some of the stories that have come out of these workshops, and that's how I would answer this question.
That's a good answer. I will say that I am drafting a research proposal in order to try to quantify the different types of impact that this model has, because anecdotally we do see students engaging without so much instructional effort on projects that extend way beyond what other projects might extend to. And I don't know what is causing that, and if it is involving, you know, co-designers in that process, or if there's just the allowance to become friends with their co-designers, if that's the thing. There is something, and I don't know quite what it is. I keep doing it because I feel in my heart it works, and I hear lots of great stories, but I also am trying to tease apart how this impact is working out.
Rudy has just asked to ask more questions, but I do have. Oh, hold on, Rudy. We do have an audience here. So I have 2 questions. One from Nor, who is interested in being put on the announcement list for the upcoming MITx course and about accessibility. What's the email I should write to, is her question. And I can add that.
Oh yeah, you can. So if you actually go to ppat.mit.edu, there is a sign up link here. I can actually show that on my computer. So this PPAT Friends email list you can sign up for, and we will announce on that list. And you can also email me personally. I don't know a good way to show this. I'm gonna write it. Just Keane@mit.edu.
Okay, great. And we have one more question. The photo, this is from Pauline Dowell. The photo that is showing is of me and my PPAT team that I worked on with an audible sailing technology. It was such a great experience. Can I do another PPAT project, or is it only one per co-designer?
No, we love repeat co-designers. Please come back. You are amazing, and we are going to tell your story for years to come. No, there's a certain level of refinement that we get with repeat people who are serving as these co-designers, where they become really, really good at teaching MIT students and whatever local students they're working with at a level that's appropriate for them. So there's something just truly magical about getting people who come back and do it a second or third or fourth time, because they become incredibly efficient at engaging the students on the level that really pulls them in quickly. So yeah, please do send more projects for PPAT, as well as let me know if you want to come to India or Saudi Arabia or something like that.
Okay, and I am not getting any more questions, so I would like to thank everyone for the last minute pivot to a virtual seminar and for participating in this, this session. And please do follow the links in the chat, but I will also send a follow-up email with all the information. So thank you so much for coming, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you.